Today, we will be exploring the post-independence history of Sudan, a nation bordered by Egypt to the north, Eritrea and Ethiopia to the east, South Sudan to the south, the Central African Republic to the southwest, Chad to the west, and Libya to the northwest. Once the largest country in Africa, the period of the Anglo-Egyptian condominium, which lasted from 1898 to 1956. This arrangement came about after Britain had effectively taken control of Egypt in 1882, but even earlier, in 1820, Egyptian forces, then part of the Ottoman Empire, had invaded and conquered northern Sudan, placing the region under Egyptian dominance long before British involvement began. When British and Egyptian forces jointly defeated the Mahdist state in 1898, Sudan was brought under a peculiar form of colonial rule, governed jointly by Britain and Egypt, but in reality dominated by British interests. It was within this colonial framework that Sudanese political consciousness began to take shape. The 1930s saw Sudanese nationalism start to take hold. Particularly, the 1936 Anglo-Egyptian Treaty allowed Egyptian civil servants to return to Sudan, yet Sudanese leaders were not consulted. This exclusion deeply angered a new generation of educated elites who channeled their frustration into the formation of the Graduates General Congress. Over time, the Congress fractured into two camps: the Umma Party, willing to work with the British toward self-governance, and radicals led by Ismail al-Azari of the National Unionist Party, NUP, who championed full independence and unity with Egypt. Meanwhile, momentum toward self-rule accelerated after the 1952 Egyptian Revolution, which saw the overthrow of King Farouk and the rise of a nationalist republic. With Egypt now under new leadership, a renewed urgency emerged to resolve the status of Sudan. This brought about the 1953 Anglo-Egyptian Agreement, which laid out a path for Sudan to achieve self-government within 3 years. The agreement was a turning point. It called for Sudan's first nationwide parliamentary elections, held between November and December of 1953, to form a representative government, despite British hopes that their allies in the Umma Party would win. It was the NUP that claimed a decisive victory. Azari had campaigned on a platform advocating for unity with Egypt. As a northerner, Azari inherited the deep-rooted divide between Sudan's north and south, a legacy of colonial rule that had governed the Arab Muslim north and the African Christian and animist south as two separate worlds. They boiled over into a mutiny by southern soldiers, igniting Sudan's first civil war. It was a direct response to the Arab-dominated government's failure to deliver on a promised federal system, something Southerners saw as vital to protecting their identity and ending decades of marginalization. Despite the ongoing tensions, on 1 January 1956, the United Kingdom and Egypt formally recognized Sudanese independence, which had been unilaterally declared on 19 December 1955. In addition to the ongoing civil war, Sudan's newfound independence quickly gave way to political instability, and by mid-1956, Azari was forced to resign as his government collapsed. In his place, Abdallah Khalil of the Umma Party formed a coalition government with other like-minded factions, but the alliance lacked cohesion and struggled to govern effectively. As administrative paralysis deepened, General Ibrahim Aboud seized the moment, launching Sudan's first military coup in November 1958. Parliament was dissolved and political parties were banned. Aboud's regime promoted Arab nationalism, centralization, and attempted economic reforms. Yet his harsh integration policies toward the south, including Arabic language imposition and suppression of Christianity, inflamed tensions. The war escalated, and in 1964, national protests, sparked by students and fueled by discontent across all sectors of society, forced Aboud to resign. This October Revolution restored civilian rule under a transitional government led by Serkatim Khalifa. Hope was short-lived. The 1965 elections returned old sectarian divisions to parliament. Pressure from religious elites and the government's failure to address the southern conflict led to more instability. On May 25, 1969, Colonel Ghaffar al-Nimeiri led a leftist military coup, establishing himself as president and adopting a socialist agenda. Political parties were dissolved, and Nimeiri turned to the Soviet Union for support. In 1971, he survived a failed communist coup and responded with purges. The Addis Ababa Agreement of 1972 marked a high point, ending the First Civil War and granting the South limited autonomy. This ushered in a fragile peace, bolstered by international goodwill. But after oil was discovered in Bentiu in 1978, the northern government's interest in the South grew. By 1983, Nimeiri had scrapped the Addis Ababa Agreement, imposed Sharia law, and redivided the southern region, sparking the Second Sudanese Civil War. The Sudan People's Liberation Army, SPLA, led by John Garang, launched a resistance rooted not just in southern autonomy, but in transforming Sudan into a democratic and pluralistic state. But Nimeiri's Islamization policies alienated the South, reigning more terror. Facing economic collapse and public unrest, Nimeiri was deposed in 1985 by General Abdelrahman Sewar al-Dahab. The 1986 elections restored civilian rule under Sadiq al-Mahdi of the Ummah Party, but his administration failed to address the war or economic challenges. In 1989, Colonel Omar al-Bashir, in alliance with Hassan al-Turabi's National Islamic Front, staged a coup. Bashir suspended the constitution, imposed Sharia law, and initiated a puritanical Islamist regime. He deepened the conflict in the South. While the war in the South raged on, new cracks emerged. In 2003, the marginalized Darfur region erupted in rebellion. Rebel groups like the Justice and Equality Movement and the Sudan Liberation Army rose up against Khartoum's neglect. In response, Bashir's government mobilized Arab militias, the Janjaweed. These groups unleashed a wave of terror across Darfur. Over 300,000 people were killed and more than 2 million displaced. The United States declared it genocide, and later in 2009 and 2010, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants against Bashir. Despite international condemnation, Bashir clung to power. But let me take you back to 2005, a monumental milestone that saw the government sign the Comprehensive Peace Agreement with the SPLA in Kenya. This accord essentially brought about the end of the civil war and granted South Sudan autonomy. 6 years later, South Sudan gained independence from Sudan following a successful referendum. But for Sudan, this resulted in economic collapse. The country lost most of its oil fields, sending inflation soaring. Armed conflict persisted in the regions of Blue Nile and South Kordofan. The 2010s saw protests and demonstrations escalate into a nationwide revolution against Bashir's regime. Finally, on the 11th of April 2019, after 30 years of Bashir's reign, the military removed him, but retained control through the Transitional Military Council, TMC. On June 3, 2019, the TMC responded to a peaceful sit-in outside army headquarters with a massacre, killing over 120 people. Yet the resistance did not fade. International mediation brought about a transitional power sharing deal in August 2019. A sovereignty council was formed between civilians and the military, with economist Abdallah Hamdok as prime minister. Plans were laid for democratic elections in 2023, but this transitional period was riddled with tensions. On October 25, 2021, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan led a coup, dissolved the Sovereignty Council, and placed Hamdok under house arrest. Mass protests reignited. As the political crisis deepened, so did military divisions. The Rapid Support Forces, RSF, formerly the Janjaweed, now led by Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, commonly known as Hemeti, began to rival the regular army. In April 2023, this power struggle exploded into full-blown war. The RSF clashed with the Sudanese armed forces in Khartoum, Darfur, and other regions. Over 13,000 people were killed and millions displaced. Reports of renewed ethnic cleansing emerged from Darfur, with RSF-linked fighters targeting non-Arab communities. As of 2024, Sudan teeters on the brink of state collapse. The United Nations has warned of impending famine and further atrocities. Negotiations remain frozen. In the midst of all this, regional powers, including Egypt, Ethiopia, the UAE, and even Russia, continue to back different factions for strategic gain. This is Sudan's post-independence story, a nation full of brilliance and potential, repeatedly hijacked by militarism, greed, and foreign interference.